So good morning. My name is Christine Muir. I am the community librarian at Cary Library. I am very happy to welcome all of you to this crochet workshop. We'll be making a beanie cap today. All of our programming at the library is sponsored by the donors to the foundation, so we appreciate everyone who contributes to that organization. I am recording this program. I will be spotlighting Julia's workstation, so that should be the only thing that comes out in the recording. If you ask a question out loud, it will capture your audio, but I will not be capturing any of your faces in the recording. And I will be posting it to YouTube, so you can all go back and watch it again, and you can share it with anybody else who might be interested in this kind of a workshop. So I'll send that link out in a follow-up message later today. So today we're making beanie caps out of crochet. So you have a supply list, you have a pattern. I will be putting the pattern into the chat and we will go through the steps together. This is our third crochet workshop. It's something new that we launched during the pandemic and in virtual programming. It's much easier to do this kind of workshop in person, so I appreciate your patience as we kind of tweak our process in doing this. Julia will demonstrate some techniques and explain the process. And if you get stuck, we may move ahead to let everybody else go on to the next step and then come back and help you. And again, like I said, I'm recording this, so we'll always have a fallback for being able to repeat steps. In our last workshop, we had a few people kind of get hung up on one step in the process and it held back some of the other people. So we're going to try to find the right balance for that this morning. So with that, I will turn things over to Julia, and once she's introduced herself, then I will highlight her workspace so that you can actually see the process that she's walking us through. So there you go, Julia. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Yeah, so hello everyone, I'm Julia. I'm a crocheter and amigurumisist, and I'm really excited to share with you this pattern today. Yeah, so let's get started. Awesome. So hopefully everyone should be able to see my workspace now. So this is the beanie that we're making today. It's very straightforward, and it's actually made out of a rectangle. So we're not going to be working in the round, we're going to be working in turned rows. And as you can see, I put the bottom down. So this part is basically stitched together and it forms a tube. And so we're going to make a rectangle, make it a tube, and then close the top off. That's how the beanie works.
Julia, I'm just going to step in for 1 second. I forgot to let people know, if you have any questions, you can unmute yourself and I will call on you because I can see in the participants list who's unmuted, or you can put your question into chat, and when there's a good break in the process, I'll jump in with your question. So there is a chance for you to ask questions as we go along.
Yep, thank you so much. Yeah, so this is what we're going to be making today. And let's just do a quick intro about the general materials we're going to be using and like what crochet is before we jump into the actual techniques. So what is crochet? Crochet is making fabric out of yarn and a hook. And you do so by basically creating a lot of knots. So you can make all kinds of things, but like I said, today we're going to be making a rectangle. And we're going to be using, so hopefully you all have these materials. We're going to be using yarn, a hook. I'm using an size I hook because I'm using worsted weighted yarn, which hopefully is what you also have. But if you don't have the exact right hook, that's okay, because if it's a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller, it's not the end of the world. You also need a pair of scissors and a tapestry needle for the end. And if you don't know the circumference of your head, you might want a tape measure to be able to measure your head, or you can just kind of guesstimate later when I show you the list of the sizes. You don't have to know the size of your head. And also a stitch marker could be helpful if you think that you might have trouble identifying what the stitches are. And this is basically just a giant plastic safety pin, and it could make it easier. And I'll show you how to use it later. All right, so let's go over what a crochet pattern is, which Christine mentioned. We're all going to be working off a crochet pattern today. And we're also going to go over how to read it. So I'm going to screen share the pattern now. Oops. Is everyone else having trouble hearing me too?
I'm hearing you okay.
Okay, I'll try to speak a little bit louder. So I'm going to screen share my pattern now. So this is a beanie pattern. And at the beginning of every pattern, you usually have a materials list, which is what you also got, and a brief introduction into like what it is. And with this beanie, we're also going to have a size to head circumference in inches little chart, because this beanie pattern can actually be adapted for any size, from like a baby to an adult size head. And so with this chart, you can figure out which size hat you want to make. And it says baby small, medium, large, and it gives you a general age range that they might fall into, and also the head circumference. To measure the head circumference, you can just put a tape measure around your head and around like the widest point of your head. And then you'll be able to know what size you fall into, if maybe like you think your head is a bit larger than usual or smaller, so the age thing doesn't really work out. For instance, my head is about 22 inches, so I fall into adult medium category, which like I don't think I could have guessed that, but yeah. So this is a great chart, and Christine's going to put it in the chat later to help you identify which size you fall into, or maybe you're making it for your kid or for someone else's kid, so that can be really helpful. So the most important part of the pattern is the abbreviations list, because the pattern is written in a kind of shorthand with lots of abbreviations, so that it saves space, and it saves a lot of space on the pattern. So when you are in doubt about anything that's on the pattern, or something looks really confusing, you don't know what it is, you just refer back to the abbreviations list, and then it will give you the full term. And then from there, you can either Google or YouTube search it, or maybe if you know what the stitch is, then you'll just know what it means. So always refer back to their abbreviations if you're in doubt. So here is the actual pattern. This might look a little bit intimidating at first, but we're just going to for like I think 3, 6, 8 different. So if you remember, before we had the 3
Julia, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Your connection froze for a second. I don't know if that was just on my end, or if other people also didn't hear just the last thing that you said.
Sure.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry about that. Oh, the joys of Zoom. Right, so this is the pattern part, and it has the pattern in 8 different sizes, and it's broken down into the baby, child, and adult categories. So as if you remember before, we had 3 sizes for the baby category: 0 to 3 months, 3 to 6, and 6 to 12. And the corresponding head circumference is up in that chart over there. So I didn't write down the entire thing, because it would be a little bit space consuming. So if you are going by head circumference, then just refer up to this list to figure out which size it matches up to. But basically, this pattern shows you how to make the beanie for all the different categories of sizes that were mentioned above. So like I said before, I decided that I was an adult medium. So I would ignore all of this stuff over here and decide that I was an adult medium, and then only follow the pattern that was written for the medium size. And the way I know which numbers are for which size is because here there's a parentheses up top with 3 sizes, and then whenever a number is listed, there are 3 different numbers. So for the medium size, I'm always going to be the second number, because it comes second in this little list over here. So that's why there's so many numbers. Is if you actually break down each size, it's relatively simple, but it's just written all together to make it easier for you to refer to. So let's say I was trying to make a hat for like a 7-month-old baby, and so I'd refer up to here. Notice that it was the third one in this list of three sizes, and then whenever I saw a list of 3 numbers, I would know that I would have to only pay attention to the third number. So this one, this one, this one, and this one. So this is where printing a pattern out can really be helpful because you can circle the right number for the size that you want to make, or you can highlight it or something like that. But if we're following today, you can just keep looking up to see which size you want to be doing, and then just go down to the first, second, or third, or just first and second size. So hopefully that makes sense. Does anyone have questions about how to read the pattern for the size?
And again, feel free to unmute yourself or put a question into chat and I will read it for you, whatever you're comfortable with.
Oh, someone just asked about a small child. Right, so like I mentioned before, you can
It's
either,
okay, I figured it out, thank you.
okay, awesome. I'm glad it was helpful. Great, so this is the pattern, and so this is the crocheting part where we make the rectangle itself, and then like I said at the beginning, the last step for turning the rectangle into a beanie magically is we're going to cinch, we're going to make the rectangle into a tube and then cinch up the top. And we might not get to the finishing part today, but I will demonstrate it at the very end. And also I've made a YouTube video that you can just click onto the pattern for that walks you through the same steps for closing and finishing out the hat in case you want to get to it. All right, so let's get into the actual crocheting. So everyone get out your hook and your yarn.
And I'll put the pattern into chat now so that if you want to be able to follow along with it, you'll see it right there.
Great. So first of all, just really quickly, how to hold a crochet hook and yarn. If you already know how to do this, that's totally fine, but we'll just go over it really quickly in case anyone doesn't know. So there are 2 ways to hold a crochet hook. This is the tip and this is the handle, and yours might be all metal or maybe wood even or plastic, but this is what it looks like. So the knife grip, which is what I use, is where you hold the crochet hook like a knife. So you would just wrap your hand around the handle with your thumb pointing towards the tip of the hook. So in this case, like this is, if you're holding like a knife, the tip is on the side. Yeah, and it's pretty straightforward. You just make sure you wrap your fingers all around it so you can get a lot of leverage. And then the second way to hold it is the pencil grip, where you hold it like a pencil. And in this case, you would also put the tip on the side, on the same side as your thumb. And making sure that your fingers aren't too close to the tip or too far back, just like right about maybe like an inch or so off from the tip. Some people find that this gives you like a looser tension. It's easier for garments. So pick whichever way feels better. I think the knife is more popular though, but you can decide. And holding the yarn is a little bit more tricky. So usually you would hold the yarn in your left hand, unless you're left-handed, in which case it would be reversed. But if you're right-handed, hold the yarn in your left hand and vice versa. So when you hold the yarn, there are a lot of ways to hold the yarn, but here are 2 that work for me. So the first way might be a little bit easier to grasp at first, which is where you literally sandwich the yarn between your second and third fingers. And when we're working, you'll just hold the yarn like this in your second and third fingers, and then we'll be working over here. And I'll show you more how to do that later, but that's the first way. And the second way is where you wrap the yarn around your pinky like once or twice. And then you go under your fourth and third fingers and then over your index finger. So all of this is just to create some tension in this section of the yarn right next to your left hand. And the idea is that it doesn't slip out of your hand that easily, but if you tug on it, then it'll move. And so for the one where you hold it between your second and third fingers, you can still tug it and it'll move, but it won't just like slip through that easily. All right, so that's how to hold the hook and yarn. And let's get into the first part of the pattern. So the pattern's in the chat now. So everyone like identify which size you're making. If you don't have like a specific idea of what size you want to make, just go with the smallest size, like the 0 to 3 month baby, because it's faster and smaller. So maybe it could be more satisfying quickly. But yeah, so today I'm going to be making, let's say like a medium adult hat. And you'll notice that actually all of the patterns are the same. Just the numbers are different. So it says for all the patterns, it says chain some number of chains to start. And to begin, before we chain, we need to make a slip knot. So like we mentioned at the beginning, I'm going to demonstrate this, and then we can all try it out and ask questions. So grab your yarn, and I'm going to arrange it like this with the tail end. So the tail end is the end that's not attached to the ball, and the working end of the yarn is the end of the yarn that's attached to the ball of yarn that I have. So I'm just gonna lay the yarn out with the tail end on the right and the working end on the left in a kind of upside down like V, or like a little mountain. And I'm just going to grab the yarn on the right hand side of the V, and I'm just going to move it over the other side. So it creates this little loop here. And then I'm going to reach my right hand into the loop and grab the tail end. And once I grab the tail end of the yarn, I'm not going to let go. So I'm holding it out and I'm not going to let go of it. And with my left hand, I'm just going to pull on the working end of the yarn without letting go of my right hand. And that's a slip knot. And to make the slip knot smaller, I'm going to pull on the tail end a little bit to make the knot a little bit smaller. I'll demonstrate that one more time, and then we can do some questions.
Why don't we have people do it along with you for this second one? So if you want to go ahead and do the slip knot during the second demonstration, then we'll see if we have any questions.
Sure. All right, so make sure that your yarn is arranged in an upside down V with the tail end on the right, and maybe leave like 10 inches or a foot on this side. And using your right hand, grab the side of the yarn that's on the right side of the V, that's closest to the tail end, and just move it over this piece of yarn over here. So literally pick it up and move it over. So that should form like a little loop. And with your right hand, reach through the loop here that you just made, and grab the tail end of the yarn. So reach through the top and grab the tail end. You don't have to do anything, just hold on to it. And once you grab the tail end, don't let go for anything. So once you've done that, with your left hand, grab the working end of the yarn and just pull. You don't have to do anything with your right hand, just pull with your left hand. Mine got a little bit too big. Hopefully that should work, and you should have this giant loop at the end of your yarn. And to make this loop smaller, pull on the tail end of the yarn that's sticking right here to make it smaller.
If anybody didn't get that, go ahead and unmute yourself or put a message into chat. I think that's a fairly simple first step. So I'm just going to watch for any questions, and if I don't see any, we'll go ahead and start the chaining. And I'm not seeing any, so I'm going to assume everybody made their slip knot okay.
So now you have slip knot. Yay, we can get started now. So with your slip knot, insert your hook. So hold your hook in the right hand or your dominant hand, and just put it through the eye of that little knot. And it doesn't really matter which way you go in, but I prefer to go in with the tip facing, pointing towards the working end of the yarn. So, and once you get your hook in there, pull on the tail end to make sure that the slip knot is tight around the tip of the hook. And from now on, we're just going to ignore the tail end of the yarn, and we're only going to be worrying about the working end of the yarn, which is attached to the ball. So this is where we actually begin the pattern. So the first row of the pattern says chain number of chain however many number of times. So I'm going to demonstrate the chain stitch. So hold the yarn in your left hand. And like I mentioned before, there are 2 ways to hold the yarn. So I'm just going to hold it this way, where you literally hold it between your second and third fingers, because that's, I feel like, more beginner friendly. And the thing is, when you hold the yarn in your left hand, you want to make sure that you have tension in this section of the yarn between your left hand and the hook, because that's what allows you to actually work with the yarn and manipulate it with the hook. Otherwise, it's kind of just really loose and really difficult to maneuver. So if you think that you're having a lot of trouble with crocheting, it's probably because your tension is too loose. Probably not, it's usually not too tight, but usually it's too loose. So that's what makes it really difficult. So to hold it with your left hand, and you can hold with the other fingers, you can like hold the tail or something, or just hold the little knot over here. And we're gonna be doing the chain stitch now. So I'm gonna demonstrate this first. To chain, you yarn over, meaning you move your hook from left to right under the working end of the yarn. So I've just gone from left to right under the yarn, and I'm just gonna pull this new yarn over through the slip knot on my hook. And I'm gonna do that just by pulling my right hand back gently until my hook slides through that knot. And that's a chain stitch. Yay. So I'm gonna do it one more time. So again, hold your yarn in your left hand so that you have tension, meaning it's a little bit tight here. And with your right hand, move your hook from left to right under the working end of the yarn, which you're holding in your left hand. So left to right, and then pull that new yarn over through the loop on your hook. Just pull it back. And that's a chain. And once you've gotten that down, you just continue chaining for however many times it says in the pattern. So it could be a lot or maybe a little bit less.
So why don't we have everybody go ahead and try doing this chain stitch, and Julia will chain the number that she needs for, I think you said you're making the adult medium. And then you can show us how you're going to count to make sure that you have the right number at the end. And I'll also say to people that chain stitch is a great way to practice the tension. I think the toughest part about crochet is getting the right tension so that you stay even, but can move your hook through the yarn fairly comfortably. So the chain stitch is a fantastic way to practice that, because it's not that hard. You don't have to think too much about what you're doing, but you can practice getting the tension. So Judy is asking about any tips for keeping a stable tension. Do you want to answer that, Julia? I have some thoughts too, but.
Okay, so I'll go ahead with my thoughts. My main tip with tension is just to hold the work with your left hand and also hold the yarn, because that way then your left hand won't just be like pulling or like kind of like off to the side. So if you make sure that your left hand is holding both the project and the yarn that you're working with, then you can kind of stretch it out with your left hand and make sure that the tension is what you want it to be. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm also really careful, both with knitting and crochet, to pull the working yarn just tight enough to be snug around the needle or the hook, but not super tight. If it's too tight, then it's going to be hard for you to work with it. But if it's just snug, like just a perfect fit, then you'll maintain a more even tension. So you can just watch how tight you're pulling it around the needle or the hook. Richard is saying his keeps coming undone. Why would it come undone?
I think that, well, slip knots come undone when you pull on both sides. So that's what I can imagine. So both with the chain and with the slip knot, if you pull on the working end of the yarn, it will just come out like that. So, which is both a good thing and a bad thing.
So Richard, are you able to make the slip knot successfully? I can see you, so you can just nod. Okay, so you're making your slip knot okay. So I think when you're doing the chain stitch, just make sure that you're using the working end of the yarn to pull through, and that you're not doing anything with the tail end except holding it to the side.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. I've definitely started working on the tail end before, and then suddenly the yarn disappears and you're like, wait, what happened?
Yeah. And this is the kind of thing, go ahead and practice it a little bit. Keep putting your questions into chat or unmute yourself. And Julia, why don't you go to the number of chains that you need and then show us the counting?
Yep, I'm actually gonna do I changed my mind. I'm gonna do the small size because I want to be able to demonstrate quickly.
And feel free to offer us some feedback, excuse me, if we're going too fast or too slow. We're assuming no real knowledge of crochet, but I also know we're all adults, so I don't want to go too slow.
Yep. All right, so I've just finished my first row, which is 29 chains, so it's the 0 to 3 month size. And to count the chains, which is really helpful, notice that each time you make a chain stitch, you end up with this little, it looks like a braid, but like a bunch of V's in a row. And each one of those V's, so this is one, that's one, that's one, and that's one, is one chain stitch. So basically, to count how many chains you have, you just count however many V's you have. So I'll just demonstrate that really quickly. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and so on. So hopefully you can see how I'm counting. And it helps because you need to make sure that, that you get the right number at the beginning.
So we'll give everybody a minute, excuse me, to work on that. Peggy says she's an experienced crocheter and knitter, and the hardest part in the beginning is getting the tension right. So she is encouraging you to have patience. It will come. And I can echo that, Peggy. I think you're right. It is a matter of having patience and practice and just doing it over and over again until you're comfortable with it. And that's why the chain stitch is such a great way to practice, because it's so simple.
Exactly.
Judy, you're
Judy,
off mute. Yep.
Can you demonstrate what you count? So is this loop that's on your crochet hook counted? So is it?
Yes.
So do you start from here or end with this one? Which one do you end with?
Right, so the loop that's on your hook does not count as a stitch because it's just a loop. But this, so I'm showing you both like the mic hook and the last thing I chained, but this counts as the last chain stitch. And so the loop that's on your hook is just a loop. And you usually start counting from the beginning, like from the tail end, and go towards the hook. And you can see that there's actually like two sides to your chain stitch. The top is the one that has the V, and the bottom has tons of tiny little bumps, which can be pretty confusing. So this is like the back kind of my work, and this is the top where I'm counting. So if you can't see the V's, just flip it over, and that might help.
I see.
I can't get the slip knot, the first loop, stay on the crochet hook when I'm trying to pull through making the next.
You're having trouble with that? Try pulling on the tail end to make sure that the knot is really tight around the hook.
Okay.
That might help.
Okay. And you only go through the stitch behind it, right? If you have more.
Yep, you only go through the one.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Quick question.
Yep.
So I've done my stitch, and I just want to confirm I'm making an adult small, and so I should go with the first number. That's 45, right?
Exactly. Yep. You should do 45.
And it will be like the first number throughout the whole design, right?
Yep. So you can just go ahead and cross out the other ones if you want, actually, because that might make it easier.
Yeah. Thank you.
No problem.
I just want to jump in with 2 comments. I am muting people again after you get to ask your question. And if you could let me call on you after you unmute, just in case 2 people unmute at the same time. I don't want to talk over each other. I think we're having not the greatest connection today, so some of the audio is a little warbly. So if you can just let me call your name before you start your question, that way we make sure everybody can hear it okay. And yes, somebody commented about the overhead camera becoming fuzzy, but I wonder if it was because Julia pulled her hands away and it didn't have something to focus on. I think that might happen. So please, thank you for letting me know, and keep keep notifying me of things like that because I'm watching the chat and the participant list and the camera. So I appreciate your help in monitoring all of those things. If the camera goes fuzzy again, I'll interrupt Julia and we'll just make sure that the focus is all set.
Awesome. So do you want to continue with the row 1?
So yeah, I'm not seeing any other questions in chat and nobody's unmuted. So I think we can go ahead. I will assume that people are okay with their chain at the moment, and we'll go ahead to the next step. Yeah, go for it, Julia.
Awesome. Okay, so this is the hardest part of the entire pattern, and we're going to be learning the stitch that makes up all the rest of the hat, and it's called the half double crochet. So now that you've gotten to the end of your long line of chains, yours might be much longer than mine because I'm making the smallest hat possible, the baby hat. So you're going to have your hook at the end of your work. And so we're going to be going from, so this is the end of our first row, and we're going to turn basically and then go back from right to left. And then we're just going to keep moving in like a zigzag pattern across until we make a really long rectangle. So that's what we're going to be doing. So we're going to start working towards the left. So we're going to be working this half double crochet into the second chain from the hook. And I think it says that in the pattern. So like someone asked before, this chain, the loop doesn't count as a chain. This first stitch is the one that's the first chain from the hook. And the second chain from the hook is just, you count one more. So that's the first chain, that's the second chain. We're going to be working into the second chain. So to work the half double crochet stitch, you're going to yarn over once, and once again to yarn over, you move the hook from left to right under the yarn. You're going to yarn over, and then you're going to insert your hook into the second chain from the hook. So I'm going to count 1, 2, and you're going to go into the second chain. And it doesn't matter where you go, and just stick it through the middle of the 2 V's, and you'll be good. The next step is you're going to yarn over one more time and then pull through just this, the next loop on your hook that's closest to the yarn over. So we're going to pull that yarn over under the next loop only. And then the last step is you're going to yarn over one more time and pull through all 3 loops. And that is a half double crochet stitch. That was probably a bit long and a little bit confusing, so I'll do it once again, and you can try working along if you feel ready. And after the first stitch, you're just going to be working into the next chain stitches. So you don't need to skip any anymore. So I'm just going to demonstrate that one more time. So to work the half double crochet stitch, yarn over once, insert the hook into the chain that you're working into. If you're at the beginning, then you're going to put it into the second chain from the hook. But for me, I'm just going to go to the next chain. Yarn over one more time, and then pull through only the first loop. And then the last step is to yarn over once and then go through all 3 loops.
So as Julia said, this is the hardest part. This is the toughest thing to learn. But the stitch is exactly the same for the whole row. So even if you're still on your first stitch and Julia's on her third, it's the same stitch. So don't panic about where you are in your row. Does anybody have any questions at the moment? I am able to see a few people on camera, so I'm watching. They look like they're working, and I see some success in some chain stitches. But feel free to keep doing that and unmute yourself or put a question into chat. Colleen, I see you've unmuted. What's your question?
Could you just do that one more time, kind of slowly?
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, so
oops, I just dropped my ball of yarn here. So the first step is to yarn over. So move your hook from left to right, and then work into the chain stitch. So if you haven't done any half double crochets, work into the second stitch from the hook. If you have, then just the next one. And you're just going to put your hook into the chain stitch. So now you have like 3 loops on your hook. At this point, you're going to yarn over once. So now you have 4 loops on your hook, and you're going to pull that yarn over through the second the next loop only. So only go through this next loop. So you're just going to do that by pulling back on your hand, on your right hand gently until it slides through that second loop. And then you'll be left with 3 loops on your hook. And then the last step is to yarn over one more time, so you have 4 loops again, and you're going to pull that yarn over through all 3 remaining loops, and just do that by sliding back on your right hand until it goes through all 3. And that's your stitch.
So for people who are getting this, you can go ahead and do this half double crochet to the end of your chain stitch and then stop. If anybody needs to see it again or has a question about it, feel free. But for those of you who've got it, feel free to go to the end of your row. Colleen, was that helpful? Are you getting stuck in a particular spot?
That was helpful. I just having a hard time getting the stitches over the end of the hook. I think it may be my tension is too tight, probably.
Try loosening it up a little bit. Yep. The other thing is, this is meant to be encouraging. It's very easy to pull this all out and start over. So if you use this as a practice piece and your tension is uneven from one stitch or one row to the next, don't worry about it. The practice is really valuable, and you can always rip it out and redo it. Like I said, when the recording's online, but use this time to sort of practice that and get a feel for the tension. That is the hardest part.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. And if anybody else has questions, feel free to put those in to chat or unmute yourself. Or if you're comfortable, just keep going to the end of your row. And then Julia's going to show us what we do at the end of the row to turn the work around and go to the next row. I have to say, my mom is a great sewer, knitter, crocheter. She can do all the crafty things. And the first time I knit a sweater, she said to me, she said, wow, your tension is amazing. That's so good. She said, you have no patience. How did you do this? I said, thanks, Mom. It probably took me years to do it. But yeah, we've all been there. It does take patience. And once you get comfortable with it, though, it can be very relaxing. So it's worth pursuing and persevering.
I also just started learning knitting, and it's so awkward at first. Like a couple of rows, then it gets better. It always gets better, even though you have so much trouble like pulling things through loops and things like that.
I think one of the big things is people think it has to be tight tension, and it really doesn't. So that was my problem at first. I always had the tension too tight, and then you can't work with it, and it's really hard to pull your yarn through in either knitting or crocheting. So if you can be comfortable with loosening up the tension a little bit, then that makes a huge, huge difference. But it does take some practice to get to that comfort level.
Yep. How's everyone doing with the half double crochets so far?
So Alyssa says she learned to knit first, and she found crochet awkward when she first learned. She says, my friend who taught me kept yelling at me that I was knitting with the crochet hook.
That's really funny.
They are two different techniques for sure.
I definitely find knitting much harder than crochet though.
I think it's all about what you learn first, you know.
Yeah.
I found it really easy to keep the tension in knitting because you have 2 needles. So they were just constantly keeping each other in check. I like crochet because it's only 1 hook, and I'm a minimalist. So the less stuff, the better.
Exactly. I had to buy like so many different sizes and like the double pointed needles and then circular needles and all that stuff. And I was like,
Yeah.
this is so much effort.
Yeah. I also had to think about it in the sweater pattern that I bought. It had a cable pattern, and my mom said to me, oh, cables are so easy. And I was like, Mom, you're however much older than me, and you've been knitting for 100 years. It's not fair to say this is easy. But once I thought about what I was doing with the cable, because you have to hold, there's a cable holder or a stitch holder that you use to set aside some stitches to stitch in front or behind them, and it helps you move the stitches. Once I thought through and understood the concept of that, it wasn't hard, but it's not easy at first. So. So Judy finds crocheting faster than knitting, and very relaxing. It is so relaxing once you get comfortable with it. There's something about the tactile experience of the yarn and the fact that you can see your progress so immediately, right? Okay, so Julia is hitting the end of her first row. Julia, before you go into the turning, I just want to give people one more chance to ask any questions about the half double crochet. And if you all can come to a place where you can stop for a second to watch Julia at the end of the row. Because the pattern is repetitive, if you don't quite get it this time or you're not exactly in sync with Julia's timing, there will be chances to see it again and pick it up. So I'm going to let you go ahead and show. I don't see any questions or unmuting. So Julia, I'm going to let you show the turning piece.
Sure. So once you've gone to the end of the row, which so now you probably have like a little piece that looks like this with bunches of little knots in it. So there it's each stitch is actually like a knot, like I said before. Your hook is going to be on the left hand side of the work. And so what do we do now? Because now we want to keep crocheting, but you kind of got to the end. So what we do is we just turn the work so that your hook is on the right hand side. So you just flip it over. And what you do is you turn and then you chain one. So like I said before, chaining is just you yarn over and you pull through the loop. And by chaining and turning, then you've just gotten yourself back to the right hand side of the work and you can crochet all along the left because we always crochet from right to left. So before we were at the left hand side, so we need to flip it over to go to back to the right. And from here on out, it's basically the same thing, except that we're going to be working in the back loop only to create that like the ridged effect. So this is all created because we work in the back loops. If you don't want to do that yet, you don't have to. You'll still like have a beanie at the end. But if you feel like you're ready for to make like the ridged pattern and you want to get a little bit fancy, then you can do what I'm doing. So to work in the back loop, you do the same half double crochet as usual, but notice that for every stitch you have like the two sides of the V, right? Which is how we count the stitches. So the side facing you, the leg of the V facing you is the front loop, and the leg that's facing away from you is the back loop. So to work into the back loop, you just stick your hook into the stitch so that you're only going under the back loop when you go through the stitch. And then you just continue everything the exact same way. And that just creates the kind of cool pattern effect on your hat. So I'm just going to continue demonstrating how to work in the back loop like this. So once again, you go only into the back leg of that V, the one that's away from you. This is the front loop and that's the back loop. I'm gonna go into the back loop, pull up a loop, and then finish the half double crochet. And so that's why on the pattern, if you scroll back up, it says BLO, which means back loop only, in each stitch across. So just continue working into the back loops for and half double crochet all across your little piece and continue and repeat that for however many rows it says.
Did anyone have any questions on that end of the row and turning around? Is everybody okay with that? Okay. You can always ask again later, but I just want to make sure that everybody, that nobody missed that little piece of it. And it looks good. So, okay.
Yep. So for instance, since I'm doing like the little baby hat, I'm going to be working 30 rows. So from rows 2 to 30, so I guess 29 rows. I'm going to be working 29 repeats of turning, working the back loops, turning, and just going across. So that's the end of the pattern. You've done it.
But this is the part where it gets relaxing because now that you know the pattern, you just keep track of how many rows you're doing. And the other thing that I wanted to say at the beginning, it's very forgiving. If you chained 31 stitches instead of 30, it's not going to dramatically affect the outcome of your finished product. If you do 29 rows instead of 30 rows, it's not going to dramatically impact the outcome. So it's a pretty forgiving process, especially for something like this. If you're making a sweater and you're off by 1 row on each sleeve, it may not be that noticeable, but this is a pretty simple pattern that has a lot of forgiveness. So it's a great one for just practicing some of the technique and getting comfortable with it. And your finished product will still come out really nice. And the other thing is that for people who don't know how to crochet, if you just say you finished a hat, they'll be impressed and they're not going to know how to count how many rows or stitches you did. So if you don't tell anybody about your mistakes, they probably won't even notice.
Exactly. And worst case scenario, you just find someone else to give it to you if it ends up being a bit too small or big, right?
Right.
Everyone needs a hat.
So Julia is going to continue with her pattern. If at any point you need to see a piece of this again, if you need to see the turning piece or the back loop only, whatever piece, just feel free to unmute or put into chat and we'll, she can slow down and re-demonstrate something.
Exactly. And here's a, oops, where did it go? So here's a quick look at what my, this is a finished rectangle for the smallest size. And as you can see, like we basically started here and you just keep going back and forth until you create this very long rectangle. And so that's what you should have when you finish all those rows to give you a little sense of what it looks like.
So Judy asked a good question. Do you count your number of stitches after each row?
Great question. So, because how else would you know, right? So if you feel like you might have missed something or you don't feel confident, then do count your stitches. And if you have too many or too few, you can add an extra stitch. But the best way to make sure that you get all your stitches is at the end of the row, you can put a stitch marker there in the last stitch so that you know that you don't, because the easiest way to lose stitches is to not work into the last stitch. So if you put a stitch marker into the last stitch, then you'll know when you get to it, and then you can just replace it and put another one on the other side. But yes, you can do count your stitches after every row to make sure that you're still on track, because if you lose suddenly like 5, then it'll just get a little bit smaller, and that's probably not what you want.
That is a good point. I think if you end up with only one extra, but if you only end up with one extra one, it's not going to dramatically impact the shape of the hat. But if you accidentally add or skip a stitch on every single row, that could have a cumulative effect in changing the shape of the hat. So I don't know that you have to count every row, but I would probably check in a few times to make sure that you're pretty consistent, because there is a little bit of room to sort of make up for things when you stitch the rectangle. After you finish making the rectangle, you're going to stitch the 2 short ends together to make the tube. There is a little bit of room to kind of make up for something in there. But if you're off every row, by the end of the product, you're really off.
So yeah, I would definitely recommend if you're still just starting out because when you work into the last row, you know that you've made a stitch there. So just putting a stitch marker at the end to tell you, that helps.
And Randy just unmuted. So Randy, do you have a question?
I have a question. So can you hear me okay? I'm not sure I have the right thing set up.
Nope, you're fine.
My top back loop ends up being really big when I go into it. I don't know if you can see that. See how it's pulling up here? Where's my camera on my computer?
Nope, you're in the right
Here.
place. Can you see that, Julia, or do you need me to spotlight her?
I do see that. Okay.
So what am I doing how do I keep it not from pulling so big like that?
So actually mine looks like that too. Like this is what you're talking about, right? Like the back loop kind of pulls out a bit.
Yeah.
It happens on the most recent stitch. But you'll notice that like after you get past it, it kind of doesn't stitch as much. And that is entirely normal. It's fine.
Is that right? Okay, so it's supposed to look like this.
Exactly. Yeah, that looks great.
Okay.
Just because like each individual loop is a little bit more stretchy. So when you work into it, it'll expand a bit. But once you get past it, it'll be fine.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yep. No problem.
That's actually a good question, because sometimes if I'm trying to watch TV and crochet, I might lose track of something. So I sometimes can't tell which is the next stitch to work into. And so that little extra give in the one you just finished can actually be helpful. Because if you look at what Julia is showing right now, because the stitch you just finished is a little bit larger, you can tell that that's the one you just did. And so you know where your next back loop is.
Exactly.
That was
Yeah,
my
good
question.
point.
Sorry, a bunch of unmuting. I apologize. Brooke just unmuted. Do you have a question?
Yeah, just a quick clarifying one. So by going through the back loop, we're creating that ridge, but if we went through both loops, then we wouldn't create the ridge. Because I've done a half double crochet through both loops. Is that the difference?
Yep, sorry about that. That is totally fine. So like I said, if you didn't do the back loop, then it would just be flat. You wouldn't see
Okay.
the ridge. So actually this ridge is the front loop of that.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, and some patterns will say specifically one or the other, work through both loops or work through just the back loop, because it does create that different effect for it. So yep, you're reading that right.
I just think it's cool that by just doing one little thing, then you can create like a really cool ridged hat, which you see like at stores and everything.
Yep. Barbara, do you have a question?
Is there a way I can show you what I've done? It doesn't look right.
So you have to turn on your camera.
Okay.
Okay, and then if you do that, we can see.
Awesome. That looks really good.
That's back and that, I mean,
Pull it a little more to your right, Barbara. You're a little bit to the left. What are you seeing that doesn't look right?
I don't see where the separation and the ridges are going to be, like in the finished hat.
You may not have done enough rows yet. It might be that you want to do a couple more rows and then you'd be able to see it more clearly. What do you think, Julia?
It looks like I do see 2 rows for
That's
sure.
the back, that's the front. Okay, I'm good. Thank you. You're great.
Like step.
Perfect explaining. Okay.
Like I think that yours looks like mine. Like maybe the back, it's not very pronounced. Like this doesn't look like there's a ridge at all.
Yeah.
But on one side, there's like a little like step kind of because you're
Yeah.
not wearing the front loops. So that's good.
Awesome. Thank you.
The color of yarn can also make a difference. I know you're working with a darker color, Barbara, and so sometimes I think certain patterns are a little bit easier to see in a lighter yarn versus a darker yarn. So, but you look like you're on the right track. So I would say keep going and it may become more distinct. You're still muted, or you muted yourself. You can unmute again if you want.
Great teachers. Thank you.
Of course.
And I've just gone to the end where I had my stitch marker. So if you're doing this, then you can just take out a stitch marker, work into that back loop, and then just put the stitch marker back or after you've worked into it, because that way
You don't lose track of it.
Yeah,
Vieja? I'm not sure
Yeah.
if I'm saying that correctly. Please correct me.
yeah, it's Vijaya.
Vijaya.
I'm just done with the first line. How do I go back now? I
right.
kind
So
got-
good question.
You just finished
so
your
once-
first row.
Yeah,
Okay. So Julia is going to come to the end of a row and she'll demonstrate this turning again.
okay.
once you've gone to the end, so your hook is on the left side, right? Yep, that looks like what you're doing. You want to first flip your work over so that now your hook is on the right.
Okay, yeah. There you go.
So you just have to, like, if you're like this, then just flip it over.
Okay, yeah.
To do something special. Yep, and then you're just going to chain 1. So once again, to chain, you just yarn over and pull through. And that gets you set up so that you can start working from right to left again. And then you just repeat what you were doing in the beginning.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Awesome.
So I hope everyone's just working along and getting comfortable with the tension and the stitch and the yarn and the hooks. I feel free to keep unmuting yourself or adding to chat, or if you're just in a groove and working well, keep going. It's just before 11, and so we're scheduled till 11:30. We'll see how far people get in the next 15 minutes or so. Almina, do you have a question?
Yes, please. I'm on my second row and looking at the pattern, what should I look at? How many more rows do I need to make?
Question. So let's say I'm doing the baby pattern. So
Yeah.
it says rows 2 to 30, and the parentheses 32, 36. So remember, pick whichever number that matches with the size.
Okay.
So for me, I'm picking rows 2 to 30 and not rows 2 to 32. So that means you have to repeat row 2 until you get 30 rows. So repeat that step for row 2, row 3, row 4, row 5, up until however many. And you can record that by just like, you can do tally marks on a piece of paper and write down how many rows you have, if that helps.
And yeah, and I have one more question. So the first row says, in the brackets, it's 28, 30, and 32. And the first thing says you start with, 29 chains, right?
Yep.
So I didn't count the, I just went all of it, I did the chain stitch and then I did the these, whatever it's called, the half crochet all along. So do I need to count those? Is that the number in the parentheses mean that that's how many stitches, the double crochet I have to do?
Yep.
Do I need?
So at the brackets at the end of each row tell you the total number of stitches. And the reason why it went from 29 to 28 is because it says half double crochet in second chain from hook. So that's where you lost one. If you went into
Okay.
every single one, it's not a big deal. You can just, it's fine. Just continue. And so if you have like 29 and it says 28, that's okay. But yeah, the brackets at the end do tell you the total number of stitches that you should have at the end of each row.
Okay, but you don't need to skip those, how you have to skip the first one and go to the second row. Do you have to do it for every row, or it was just the second one and now you just are
It was
gonna?
just the very first row because we started with chains and we went to half double crochets, but after that, just every single one.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
And in the following rows, you chain one before you go into the back loop, and that takes the place of that extra stitch in the first row. So essentially, if you don't do that chain one when you turn, then you're not going to get a square rectangle, you'll get a lopsided rectangle. So in the first chain, you have one extra stitch, and then afterwards you make that up just by doing that chain one when you turn, and that just gives you the even edges, the parallel edges. So that's a good question. Actually, I'm glad you raised that because I was going to mention that when Julia was demonstrating the turning. That took a while for me to understand conceptually. And I have to understand the concept before I can actually follow the directions. So I'm glad you gave us the opportunity to explain that in case anybody else learns like I do. And Julia, maybe you can do a couple more rows and then just show people how you count the number of rows in case somebody, forgets. Again, it's very forgiving, but if you forget to put down a hashtag or a hash mark at the end of each row, or if you are making something larger and you start it one day and you forget where you left off the next day, maybe do a couple of rows so you can show people how you count the rows.
Yep.
And it may be different depending on the stitch. So in crochet, there's single crochet, half double, double, triple, and I think maybe a couple others. Those are the ones that I know. So depending on which stitch you're doing, counting the rows may look a little different, but I'm going to ask Julia to demonstrate a little bit of that anyways.
Yeah, I do have this finished one that has a lot more rows. And so I can just do a quick demo right now. So this is what it'll look like when you get a little farther along. So this is like the one I'm working on right now. And look how it's like very similar. It has like one ridge and this one has like many ridges. So to count the number of rows for this pattern, it's a little bit deceptive because you see there are a bunch of like very distinct rows, right? But each ridge is actually 2 rows. So if you count using the ridges, you just go 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, because each ridge is made up of, you go down one and then you see there's a little like valley. That's where the new row starts. And then because each ridge is actually made up of 2 rows. So 1, 2, and then you go up 1 and 2. So each ridge is 2 rows. So that's how you count the number of rows that you have, if that makes sense.
Yep, it does. That's what I thought the answer was. Barbara, go ahead.
Can we download the pattern somewhere?
So I sent out an email with the pattern as a PDF yesterday, and I
Oh.
will send it out again to you if
Okay.
you'd like. It was an attachment to the email, and then you can print it out yourself. If you didn't get that, you can reply to the email address that I use tomorrow or later this afternoon when I send the link to the YouTube recording.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
And you'll send out the updated one, right? Just checking.
I do have the updated one. Yes, Julia made a couple of corrections in the original, but they didn't change the pattern. The pattern was correct in the original, and I didn't want to send you all too many messages all at once. So after the program today, I will send you a link to the recording and the corrected pattern. It was just a couple of minor typos that she corrected. So I will send out the pattern again. Randy?
So I'm having trouble figuring out how because I didn't put a stitch marker in, is there any way from looking at what's at the end of my row to determine when I stop? Like, I don't know how to count the stitches because it curls up at the end.
Yes, that's a good question.
So
So,
maybe
like I said, that's a little bit, probably a little bit confusing. So if I look at my end over here, you can see that it kind of like curves down a bit. But as long as there's like a V that you see there, that is still a stitch. Like this is not a stitch, like this is like just the side, but this last little V thing that you see over here, that is the last stitch that you have.
Okay,
The whole
so
little-
I want to go in this last one right there.
It's hard to see
yeah.
that because it's a small screen,
Yeah.
but
Okay.
yeah. And if you don't have a stitch marker, you can always take a separate piece of thread and just loop it through. You know, you don't, stitch markers are great because they're sturdy and they're colorful, but if you don't have one, you can use a piece of thread and just pull it through that last loop. So that's an easy way. Julia's going to show you that right now.
Yeah, so if you, like after you work into it, you decide that's the last stitch, you can just stick your hook through and grab like a random scrap piece of yarn and just pull it through the end, and you just cut it, and then that will tell you which one is the last stitch. And when you're done, you can pull it out and then just loop it back.
Other side. Okay. Got it. So once I get into once I count the first time, then I'll be able to finish. I didn't do it at the beginning. Okay, so that's my problem.
And you get used to it too. The more you do it, the more you start to recognize it just visually.
Right. Yep. Okay, but that helps. Yeah, because I knit, so I understand. I mean, the same I was saying as you, Christine. Like, I want to understand what it's supposed to look like, and that will help me know where to start and where to stop. So.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Makes sense. Thanks.
Heidi, you also had a question?
No,
No?
no, thank you.
Okay.
No,
Judy?
So this is a question that I always have, I debate with myself. I'm crocheting an Afghan right now, but I don't think I got enough yarn. So what I've been doing is switching to a new skein in the middle of a row. And what is your feelings about that? I'm doing it just because I'm afraid I'm not going to have enough yarn. But when do you normally switch over your skeins?
Great question. So usually I try not to, just because that means I have to like weave in the end, right? I don't like that. But if I run out, if like the pattern call is like a 2 skein pattern, and then I need to switch at some point. So I guess if I could, I would try switching off at the end so that it's less disruptive. And hopefully like if it comes loose, it won't come off in like the middle of my project. But like, I think it's totally fine, especially like if you run out of yarn, like you said that you're doing. If it was an Afghan, I would probably try to like do it at like a less noticeable area, like maybe at the corner of one square. But yeah.
Okay.
Unavoidable.
Yeah.
I've also heard of really, if you're using wool yarn, you can like felt the edges together so that like it doesn't actually switch like threads of yarn, but that's like a little bit more advanced.
Yeah.
Barbara?
Could you please show, well, when she gets to the end of the row, I'm not
Yep.
sure which one to go into, if it's the loop or if it's the last stitch. So I'll look for that.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll put that in 1 second.
Yep.
Actually, I'll just frog back. So here's me at the end of the last row, and then I chain, I turn, and then now my next half double crochet is going to go into the last stitch in the row, not the chain. So here's my chain that I just made. I can tell it's a chain because it's kind of hanging off the edge, like it's not attached to the main piece. This is the chain, and I'm going to go into the last stitch of the last row. And it looks kind of like, if remember at the very beginning we went to the second chain from the hook, it looks kind of like if you count 2 stitches. So this is the first one we're going to skip and then go into the last stitch of the row, like that. Does that help?
Julia, can you do it one more time, but with a slightly different angle? Instead of, you had, I don't know how to say it. So chain the one and turn it. And then tilt the, so we can see the top of the V's a little bit. Yeah, right there, right there, right there. So I don't know if this helps, Barbara, but what Julia's holding right next to the hook is not a stitch, but then you can see the V right there, and that is a stitch. Is that helpful? She's muted again, but that's something that I always had trouble with.
The last stitch of the row before this, before you turn.
Before
the last stitch before you turn.
Okay. I see. Okay.
Thank you.
So, whoops. Mine looks a little messy now. Okay, but so here we are at the end of the row. And then I can tell which is the last stitch because, actually, I think I skipped it earlier.
I was going to say, I don't think you did the last stitch. Okay.
So this is actually my second to last stitch. And so over here, I see there's like a little V, but the thing, because you're at the end, it's a little bit vertical because you've been pulling the work. So it might be easy to miss, which you can see I just missed it. But as long as it looks like a V, work into it, even if it doesn't look like it's a stitch, if it looks like it's vertical, because it is a stitch.
Okay.
This is not a stitch, but this is a stitch.
Got it. Thank you. But it's not the loop. It's not the loop at the beginning. You don't have one at the end. Oh, I see. Okay. There isn't one.
Okay. Yeah, that's.
Okay. Thank you.
The other thing that I sometimes do, because that is definitely something that I've struggled with too, is I'll go back and I'll count the stitches I've done so far. And if I've done 29 and I need to do 30, then I know that I have one more to do. But again, it's a matter of getting used to seeing it and what it looks like, and then just getting more comfortable with that.
Yeah, and like we went over before, like if you, I can see I just worked 2 at the beginning. So I know that I'm going to put the stitch marker or the piece of yarn at the first stitch. So when I come back around, I know that was the last one. So I won't miss it again.
Randy, go ahead.
Okay, sorry, all these questions. So now that I'm on my third row, the top has V's, but if I turn it towards me, it's almost like there's 2 sets of V's like this. So which is the stitch I'm getting, this side or the back side V's? Does that make sense?
So, Julia, do you want to bring your piece up to the camera again? So those are the ones you want to stitch into, right? What Julia is showing you right now. And I think if you tilt it the other way, you can see these V's along the side. I mean, they kind of look like V's, but they're a different direction.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yes. So it looks like
yes. Which ones are we doing? Yeah.
But only working to the top. And you can kind of, if you kind of mush it, or if you try to straighten it out, you can see some of them are clearly on the side and some of them are on the top. So only work into the top ones. And it's made a little more tricky because we're doing back loops, which can make it tricky to see what is on the top and what's not. But if you look into like your hook is going into the back loop. So just make sure you count. So if you know your hook is in the back loop, then you know this is the back loop of the top. So this is the front of the top. So this is the set that you're going into.
What's the top part?
So they'll feel very horizontal when you're looking at it.
Okay, right. But so oh wait, mine doesn't look like.
So this is the side ones. This is the top. And
So-
actually, like the front loop of the top is like the it kind of forms like those like side V's that you see. They just pointed out, which can be a little bit confusing. But now that you know that they're two sets, make sure you only go into the top one.
And if you think
Okay,
about the
I
way
was
you're
doing the
holding your
wrong one.
fabric, you want the bulk of the fabric to be kind of coming straight down like a curtain. If you're holding your fabric so that it's pointed towards you, then you're going to be working on the wrong V's. So your fabric should be hanging straight down like a curtain.
Okay.
That was
I
a
don't
good
know.
idea.
And the point of the V should be on the left with the opening to
Yes.
the right.
Correct.
Yes, that's a really good. Yes, exactly. The point is
Okay.
that's a good idea to tell.
Okay, got it.
This is a very good exercise in how to think differently about how to explain things, which is very good for us. It's good for the mind. So we're coming up to 11:15. I just want to check in with people. If you feel like letting us know if you're almost to the end of your number of rows, or
Well, I mean, I doubt the end of the number.
yeah, I don't think anybody's probably close to finishing up the number of rows. Maybe we can go 5 more minutes, and then Julia can demonstrate how to finish it up. And again, all of this will be on the recording so that we can share it with you after the class. So if you don't finish today, which it would be a lot to finish a full hat in an hour and a half, you can continue doing it. I will get the video up within the hour after the class ends. So you can still finish it today. But you may want to take a pause and watch the finishing technique just to see it once and then be able to watch it again in the video. And this will be your chance to ask any questions too as we go through it. So maybe 5 more minutes of working on our rows, and please continue asking questions. I'm glad that it's such an interactive workshop today. Like I said this morning, we've done a couple of these, and it's the kind of project that's much, much easier to troubleshoot in person. But I think we're doing okay today. I feel like people are asking good questions and they seem to be understanding the answers. So I hope you're all finding it productive and helpful as well. And Julia and I have been talking about maybe doing some additional workshops on future dates. So when I send you a link to the YouTube video, I will also be including a survey, which we send out after all of our programs, to ask for your feedback on how we did for the current program, but what else you'd like to see us offer. So if you're interested in other crochet techniques or workshops or any other program around crochet, that's a great opportunity to share that idea. You can fill out the survey anonymously, or you can include your contact information. And if you want us to get back to you with something, we are happy to do that. So that email will come out within the hour after the program. Sometimes it takes a while for the video from Zoom to be processed. Thank you, Peggy.
Yeah, that was a really good point that Randy just made. I really like that.
Peggy just said she had trouble identifying the back loop, and saying which way the V pointed made it much more recognizable. So that's good. Yeah, I don't know if that's the point you meant, Julia, that Randy just made.
Yeah, it was really helpful.
Yeah. Vijayha, do you have a question?
Yes. I had a trouble finding the endpoint. I did try my best though. Can you tell, looking at this, if I'm going right or wrong? Because I don't know. I mean, I'm just great.
Let me find you.
Okay,
So
here.
Julia, what do you think? Can you see?
It looks like you could do one more. Is there anything that looks like a V that you could work into?
I don't think I'm going straight. Did I miss something over here?
Yeah, I think you could do one more stitch because it
Oh.
looks like you didn't finish the row. Yeah.
Can I just remove this one and go back again?
Did you already turn it to go to the next row? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I did. I
Oh,
did.
yeah,
yes.
Julia, why don't you demonstrate the pulling out and how far you would pull something out?
So I think you're like here.
So I
So
think she missed her last row and turned 1 stitch early.
yeah, so if you are like this and you want to add another one over here, you can
Uh-huh.
pull on the working end of the yarn gently, and you can see
Okay.
that it'll just undo the stitches, and eventually you'll get back to, so that's, you've just frogged the whole last row you did, and then you can just frog the chain. And once you get to the chain, you want to leave it so that there's like a loop sticking out on the top, because when you get to a place where there's a loop on top, then you can just start, put your hook into the top and just start continue working. Does that make
Okay.
sense? It's on top. Yeah. So you can frog as many times as you want, as long as you get to a place where you can stick your hook in on top.
Okay.
I
Thank you.
always have trouble with pulling out too much, so it's good to know you want the loop on top, and that means that you're at the end of one stitch.
Yeah, and then you can just continue. Normal. Oh, someone asked about thicker yarn. So this pattern is meant for, oh, for context, she asked if I use thicker yarn, then what should we do? Yes, like you would just have to make fewer stitches per row, but it might be kind of tricky because this pattern is designed for worsted weight yarn, which is like level 4 yarn. And so you'd actually have to be writing your own pattern at that point.
Well, and you'd also want to use a different size hook for different, depending on how much thicker the yarn is, there are hooks of all different sizes. And so a thicker yarn would need a bigger hook for a better tension. Sometimes though, like, does this pattern give you a size, like a finished rectangle size, Julia? So you know you need to end up with a certain size rectangle in order to make a finished hat.
That's a really good point, and it doesn't, but it would be a great thing if it did.
Yeah. So you just would have to do a little math to figure out how to get the same size rectangle to fit around your head. Do you know what I mean?
Yep. Exactly. But generally it's easier to just find a different pattern at that point. Just Google like bulky yarn beanie, and then you can probably figure that out.
Yeah, there are lots and lots of patterns out on the internet, free patterns, and lots of ways to adjust patterns. But I think the most important thing is to know that you need a different size hook depending on the yarn. So there are also yarns that are very, very thin that you can crochet lace style pieces out of, and you would need a much smaller hook for that. So I think that's probably a big piece of it. And then you could always figure out if your head is 15 inches in circumference, you're going to need your rectangle to be, excuse me, at least 15 and a half, or depending on how tight you want it, you know, you could play around with that. Or you can look online and find lots of patterns. And Alyssa mentions a site called Ravelry, Ravelry, and there are lots and lots of different patterns for all different kinds of crafts on that website. So
yeah, and that website is linked on my my handout. So if you just go down, you can get more resources and more patterns there.
And in the pattern, and then Julia, it's 11:20. So I think after we finish these comments, maybe we can show people the finishing technique. In the pattern, which again, I will send out with the video link today, there are lots of additional resources. There are some other video tutorials online that you can take a look at. There's links to pattern sites. There's Julia's contact information, and you can reply to the email that I use to send out the video link. So you'll have lots of resources after the fact. And before we do the finishing, I just want to acknowledge Judy's comment in chat. She just moved to Colorado from Lexington, and she's been able to attend our programs virtually, which has been really nice during the pandemic. It must be a tough time to meet people when moving and having to isolate or quarantine. So Judy, I'm really glad that you are enjoying our programs virtually, and we hope that you're able to continue joining some of them.
I just want people to know that, you know, I've done a lot of searching of the libraries around this area. Nobody has a program like Carrie does. Even I've checked Burlington, Bedford, and, you know, I think it's an extraordinary, what people have done at Carrie is extraordinary. And I just don't know if you and your colleagues or the board even know. And I think it's important
Thank you.
that they know that this program, these programs have been wonderful for so many people, not just me.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have tried very hard in all of our age levels. Our head of youth services is with us today in this program. So I want to acknowledge her work and our teen services manager's work too. Everybody has tried their best to offer as much as we can virtually. And so we appreciate your appreciation. Thank you for saying that to us. And I will forward that comment onto our director and our foundation just so that they know that the work they
Great.
do to support us is also appreciated. We definitely don't do this in a vacuum. So I will let them know. Thank you for saying that. So Brooke wants to see the counting rows one more time, and then we'll do the finishing technique so that everybody can just see that. So Julia, I'll turn it over to you.
Yep. So once again, to count the rows, when you get a few more repeats across, then you'll notice that there are like these ridges that you see. And the thing to know is that each ridge is made up of 2 rows. And you can kind of tell that because you can see that there's the ridge and then there's like a little valley. And you can tell that there are like lines of rows going across, but the easy way to count is, you know, each ridge is 2 rows. So you can just count 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 across. And that's how you know how many rows you have. Oh, Barbara had a question in the chat about a bind needle. Does that mean, do you mean a yarn needle?
Yeah, I don't have a big yarn needle and I don't.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
You could pull, so the point of the needle is just to pull the yarn through various places, and you could do that with your hook. You could just use your hook and to pull the yarn through. That could work. It might be a bit more difficult though. Yeah, honestly, you probably do need a big needle at some point, but yeah, you could theoretically do it with your hook. Should I get started showing the finish off?
Yes, please. Thank you.
All right.
And if people just want to watch this, I know you're not at this point yet, but if you just want to be able to see it, and then you'll have a little more familiarity with it when you get to that point and you watch it on the video again. This is how you wrap it up and make it a hat.
Yep. So at this point you have a rectangle, and this is a small size once again. So yours will probably be a lot bigger. For the hat that I showed at the beginning, mine rectangle was like this, like a very, very long. But so when you get to the end, you'll have like your needle, your yarn is gonna be on the left-hand side when you finish the row, but you want it to, so you're gonna turn like usual, so that your hook is on the right and you can continue working across the left. And you're going to match up the sides of your rectangle so that they're matched up together. And because we're gonna be working into both this front row and also like the back end over here. And so what you're going to do is you're going to have the working end of the yarn, and we're going to be doing slip stitches. So slip stitches are really simple, and that's how you're going to join them together. So to work a slip stitch, you're just going to go through the front loop of the last row. So you notice that you have like this V here, and this is the back loop, and this is the front loop. So we're just going to work into the front loop of the row you just went into, of the row you just finished, and then go into the chains from the beginning. And here it's okay if you don't go into the front loop. If you go into both loops by accident or you go in the back loop, it's not a big deal. You just want to join it. You just want to go through any loops possible. You're going to go through both loops, and then you're going to yarn over and pull through all 3 loops on your hook. So it's easy to do this in steps. So you pull through the first 2, and then you can go through the last one. And that's an easy way to do it kind of in 2 stages. So I'll do that again. To do a slip stitch, you'll go through the front loop of the last row that you just crocheted, and then the first row in the very beginning on the other side. And you'll just slip stitch by pulling through the first 2 loops, like the next 2 loops, sorry, I meant over here, and then just pull through the last loop on your hook, and that's how you do a slip stitch. So
Say that one more time, Julia, without the hesitation in between. Just one time really clear through so people get it, because it is really confusing with all of the extra loops.
Right. So to do a slip stitch, you're going to go in the front loop of the the last row you just completed, and you're also going to go into the chain stitch from the on the other side, so in the very beginning. So that's how you're going to go through both like this panel and this panel.
So you're essentially connecting the two ends, front loop to front loop, and then just pulling the yarn through it. It's basically a closing seam, and it's just the two front loops from the last row and the first row.
Exactly. So now you have 3 loops on your hook. You'll have like this original loop, and then you have this the loop from the side of the rectangle, and then you have a loop from the other side of the rectangle. And then you're going to yarn over, and you're going to pull through all 3 loops on your hook. So I'm just going to pull through all 3, and then that's your slip stitch. So I'll just keep doing that all the way across, and you can see that now I'm joining the sides of the rectangle together.
And again, it's pretty forgiving. If on one stitch you get a front loop and a back loop, it's not going to ruin the finished product. It's just a matter of practicing with this enough that you get comfortable with going through those different loops. And at the end of the day, the point is to create a seam that connects the edges. If it's not perfect, but it's functional, that's okay. It gets better with practice, the more pieces you make. So if all of your friends are getting beanies for holiday gifts next year, the last one you make will be fantastic.
Yes, exactly. So you just want to keep going all the way across, and you can see that now it's creating like a seam on the edge, and almost done.
And while Julia finishes that seam, which we can all keep watching as she does it, I just want to let people know that the library has a knitting group that meets virtually on Wednesday nights at 6:30. They do welcome crocheters. It's not so much of a teaching group as just an opportunity to work on a hobby with other people who have the same interest. There are times when somebody will say, how do I do this? Or I'm having trouble with that. And so people are willing to help each other, but there's no expectation of teaching. So if people are interested in doing that Wednesday nights, it's a drop-in, no commitment. The sign-up information is on the library's calendar page. It's every Wednesday evening. So if you just went to our calendar page and looked at any Wednesday night and clicked on the knitting group, you would get information about how to get on their list to get the Zoom link. And it's a nice opportunity, like I said, to just work with people who have a similar interest. So, okay, so we're at the end of the seam.
Yep. And so now that I finished going through all the loops on our row, you can see that we've finished off the rectangle, and now it's a cylinder.
And that seam just looks kind of like one of the ridges from the other rows.
And so the next step is to cut the yarn about like 4 feet out, and you're just gonna, so I already cut the yarn, and I'm just gonna pull that end, the tail end all the way through. And that means that you won't be able to pull out any more stitches. So remember how before we were just pulling out the work by pulling the work end of the yarn? Once you cut the yarn and pull it through, you won't be able to do that anymore. Like I can't undo this. So it's done. And the very last step is to cinch the top of the hat together. So to do this, I'm just going to grab a tapestry or yarn needle, and this one. I'm going to thread the tail end of my yarn through this tapestry needle. And the reason why it's different is because it has this really large eye.
So it's a little close to the camera. People can't see the eye. Pull it back there we go. Perfect. Yep. So now people can see that that's just a really big needle eye. And it's a thicker needle too than you would use for hand sewing.
Yeah, it's really blunt. So it's basically just a giant, really blunt needle just for yarn. And so you're just going to thread the yarn through. And so this is going to be the top of the hat where I've just finished. And I'm just going to basically cinch the top together by going in and out all along the top of the cylinder, and I'm going to pull it tight. So I'll probably just go in, I'll probably go through like for every 2 rows. So I'm going to look at the ridge, and I'm going to go in on the right side of the ridge, and then I'm going to push my needle out, like maybe at the top of the ridge. So you don't have to stitch too frequently. So I'm just going to do it every other row or so.
So for people who sew, this is kind of like a running stitch. We're only going through one side of the cylinder. You're going to go all the way around the cylinder. This isn't connecting the two ends like we did with the rectangle, but it's like a running stitch, so that if you were to be creating gathers, if you were like sometimes when you put sleeves onto a top or a dress, you gather them so they're a little bit puffier. This is the same kind of idea, just a running stitch. Doesn't have to be perfect, but it should be pretty evenly spaced. And what's going to happen is at the end, when you pull that yarn, it tightens everything up and cinches it closed. So it's not a precise science. It's, you know, it's again, very forgiving.
Yeah, it's great.
But I think the important thing is that we're not connecting the both sides of the cylinder here. It's just a running stitch all around the whole top of the cylinder.
Exactly. Because this actually is we're gonna pull it and it's gonna tighten, so we don't have to be closing any of the gaps right now. And you can tell I'm almost done because, well, I know where I started because the tail is over here on the bottom. So I'm almost done going all around the top of the cylinder. So this is where I'm just gonna cinch it. And to do that, I'm gonna hold the hat with my left hand, and I'm just gonna pull on the end of the yarn that I was just working with. And it just closes up just like that. And to secure it in place, because right now you can still like kind of pull it out, I'm just gonna go and sew a few X's across the top like this. I'm just gonna go through, now we're gonna go through the hat and pull it really tight so that it doesn't
Julia, move your hand up a little bit. You're coming off the end of the camera. Thank you.
And I'm just gonna keep going across the top of the hat so that it's secured in place. So after we cinch it, we just want to make sure that it stays cinched closed. Otherwise, you'll be wearing a cylinder, not a hat. Which would
be a little drafty.
Yeah. So you can just do this maybe like 5 or 6 times. Maybe when you feel like it won't like come out that easily.
Yeah, you can kind of test it by sort of tugging like she just did to see if there are still any gaps or if it pulls anywhere. And if you were so inclined and had the, I don't know if you necessarily need to know how to do it, but if you wanted, you could attach a pom-pom at this point too, if you wanted to sort of decorate the top of the beanie.
Yep. So now that I've done it a couple times, I think that I'm good. I don't think it's gonna come out. I'm just gonna tie a knot with my yarn and tie it really close to the top of the hat so that it's not like kind of hanging off the side.
So you said to cut 4 feet. It seems like 4 feet might be a lot. Does it depend on the size of the hat?
It does. I cut extra because I knew I was going to crochet it too.
Okay.
But also like it's better to have more than less.
Okay.
Right. Otherwise we'll end up with, I mean, you could reattach the yarn, but it would be kind of difficult.
Yeah.
After I've tied the knot, I'm just going to cut it maybe like an inch out. You can also weave in the end over here, but I think the knot is going to be okay. And then the last step is just to flip it inside out. And you have a tiny beanie.
Oh, so this is now the right side.
Exactly, because you kind
Okay.
of like all the knotting is on the inside, so then the top is kind of like closed.
Yep.
So
And then it doesn't require a lot of finishing. It just puts that end on the inside of the hat.
Exactly. So now I've got
So-
like a big one and a small one.
With your tail there from starting, do you weave that in or do you just tuck that into the fold?
Dropping everything today. Yep, I would just weave it in. And so to weave it in, you can grab another needle. And weaving in just basically means kind of weaving your needle in and out somewhere near the end of the yarn, the end of the tail. And so that it's secured in place, because we don't really, because knots don't usually like help with the crochet because everything is a knot and so it might slip through. And then once it's tucked away, you can just cut it at an unobtrusive place, and then you won't see the tail anymore.
And that just hides it. I mean, everything's already secure from the way you've stitched it. So it's just being able to hide those ends at the end.
Exactly.
And that's so cute. It's so tiny.
And the video I made that I linked in the handout has like a really like edited and like nice description of the end, which is exactly what I just demonstrated.
Yeah, so we'll put this video up on YouTube, but the pattern that Julia sent, created and that I sent out and will send again has a link to a video that she did that's just finishing. And I think it was 10 minutes long. It was a little more detailed and, like she said, edited. So if you struggle with this and you want a second resource for it, then that is included in the pattern. I apologize. I know we went a little bit over. I'm very happy that we had some activity in chat. And so we did go a little bit longer than our scheduled time. So I apologize for that. And I appreciate you staying with us. Does anybody have any additional questions, or you can always use our survey to offer feedback if you want to. But if somebody has something that they want to ask or say while we're all here together, feel free to do that now. I'll just give it a second to see if anybody unmutes or puts something into chat. And while you're all thinking about whether or not you want to say anything or ask any last questions, I just want to remind you all that this was sponsored by the foundation, which does do a lot of fundraising for the library and sponsors all of our programs. So we appreciate their contributions and their support. And as I said to Judy, all of our managers really support the programming and staying connected to the community virtually too. So we appreciate all of that. I hope everybody learned something today, and I hope that you enjoyed spending your morning with us. I appreciate you doing that. Like I said, we are hoping to have some more crochet workshops, so keep an eye on our calendar if you're interested, and reach out at any time if you have any questions or suggestions. And feel free to try the knitting group on Wednesdays. Like I said, it's no commitment, but it's just stop in and meet some other people and have fun visiting while you're working. And I see some thank yous in chat, but I don't see anybody unmuting or asking any questions. So I will wrap this up. Thank you to Julia for demonstrating all of this and creating the pattern that I can share with everyone. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and hopefully we'll see you again at another workshop. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.